Hi, I'm Victoria Purman and I'm an author. My latest book is The Nurses' War. The Nurses' War is about a fantastic hospital in World War I England, set up by Australians, staffed by Australians, specifically for the purpose of treating wounded Australian soldiers from the continent. And it was donated by a couple of Australian philanthropists, and my story follows one nurse who leaves Australia and goes to England and works in the hospital, and a local village girl who volunteers at the hospital, and her life too is changed by what she experiences during World War I. This is my 18th book. I've been writing for nearly 10 years now, and it's a dream come true for me, really. It's something I wanted to do since I was a teenager, and I just keep finding these amazing stories of Australian history, and particularly women in our history who have been overlooked or forgotten, or with stories that people never thought were very important. And I've loved digging into our history and researching and bringing their stories to light and putting them at the centre of our history again. My publisher is HQ Harper Collins. They've supported me from the beginning, and I'm really appreciative that they're my team. They're wonderful people to work with. I do write full-time now. I didn't for the first 9 years of being published, and that was working every day of the week. So I worked in my day job, or my day job as I called it, and then I would work at night and on weekends. So I never felt like I was away from the desk. And I made a decision, my family made a decision that we would support me to quit my day job and live the dream. But it's taken nearly 10 years to get there. And if that's a message for aspiring writers, I want them to understand that it's not probably something you can do straight away unless you have overwhelming success first up. But publishing can be a slow burn, and I'm really grateful that my publishers have stuck with me and I get to do this now. Does it mean I write more? That's a good question. Okay, the first lucky dip question. Are you a planner or a seat of your pants writer? Well, I'm kind of both. I call myself a plotster. So I do have a rough idea of how the book is going to start and finish, and it's the research that I do for writing the book which sometimes changes the course of the narrative in the book. This particular book, The Nurses' War, was set against World War I, so I knew the events of the war, of course, but my fictional characters' stories within that framework of the war were totally up to me to create. So I do... Sometimes the stories reveal themselves to me as I go, and that's a really fun and exciting thing, to ask that question of your characters, what if this happened? And then, taking that fork in the road. So I'm not as planned to say J.K. Rowling, who I know plots each scene and each chapter in a grid. I admire that tremendously, but I can't work that way. So yeah, I'm kind of a plotster or I don't know what the other one is. A plotster, half and half. So I sit for a very long time at my desk with the company of my dog, my golden retriever, whose name's Maisie, and my family, who are very supportive of me. And it takes me probably 8-10 months to write to get it in a state where I show it to my publisher. She's my first reader, and then she comes back with structural comments, and then once she's happy, it goes to my editor, and then proofreader, and then the team who market it and put it out in the world. So it does take a village. It takes a lot of effort and commitment by a whole lot of people, and I couldn't do what I do without all of them. Australian historical fiction, and I'm really proud of that. I love digging into our history and finding those stories that aren't told, and I've got so many more ideas in my head. The hard bit is writing them and finding the time, and the emotional commitment and the bum glue, as authors know, to apply that to your bum and sit in the chair and type, Australian historical fiction. I'm proud of that. A short story, and it was sent off to a magazine, The Woman's Day, and back in 1980, the Woman's Day was very different to the version we see now, which is very gossipy and tabloidy. Back then, it was it ran short stories by writers and cooking. It was a bit more like the Women's Weekly, we might know. And I sent off my story, and I won $100, and it was published in the Women's Day. $100 was huge. So I went off to Kmart, as one did back then. I bought a typewriter. And I thought that would be my dream, to be a writer. But it took a long time between drinks, actually. So I went and studied journalism and became a journalist and worked in that world for a long time. And then in my late 40s, I thought this is really the time now to find that dream again and resurrect that dream for me and apply the bum glue and sit down and try to write a book. No, I don't dread any of it because it's just my dream to be doing what I do. Some parts are harder than others, for sure. Being out on the road and talking to readers and booksellers and librarians is the joy of it. Hearing from readers is the joy of it. The editing process can be really mentally taxing, actually, because you're asked to justify your decisions on the page. And with very good reason, sometimes editors will say, "What? That doesn't quite work," or "Why did you use that word?" or "Are you sure about this date?" And especially in historical fiction, if like I do, I base things on real events. I have to be really specific in my dates. If I sort of got the end of the war wrong, people would know. So that's the kind of the writing is the creative, free flowing bit of it for me, and the fact checking, if you like, is the super important bit, but it can be laborious, but super important. Second lucky dip question. Do you write in isolation or out in the world? I have a writing desk and I stick to my writing desk. I can't write out in the world because I find I listen into people's conversations. And that's I love listening to the way people talk to each other. It really helps with writing dialogue. But I do tend to sit at home with my dog and at my desk. And I have a lovely view from beyond my desk into the backyard, and I can see my dog outside and I can see the birds in the trees and listen to the magpies waddle in the afternoons, and it's beautiful. So it's my favourite place to be in there. I'm surrounded by shelves full of books. It's pretty heavenly, really. So I tend to stay close. And I think during COVID too, we certainly have not wanted to venture out too much when it's still, infection rates are still high. So being at home has been very comforting. When I'm writing a book and I'm deep in the middle of it, especially historical fiction, I can't read other historical fiction because I don't want to inadvertently steal an idea or a plot device, so I do steer clear of it. But that means I read crime, I read non-fiction, I read literary fiction, I read highly commercial fiction, I read romance. I love reading. That's why I do what I do. And I do read widely. I do read non-fiction for research purposes. I love that too because it's a bit easier to dip in and out of non-fiction too sometimes. And if I don't have the time to sit down for 3 or 4 hours and get through a novel, I'll pick up a non-fiction and just read a chapter I'm reading a book about incredible women in history, and so I can just read a chapter about a particular character, and that's really satisfying. But I just wish there were more hours in the day to read all the books. At the moment, I'm reading a couple of books that are coming out. So I've got advanced reader copies. That's the beauty of being an author. I get advanced reader copies. So I'm reading a couple of copies of colleagues' books. I've just finished reading The Mother Wound by Imani Hayder, which I thought was so wonderful. I read a book called Loop Tracks by Sue Orr. I interviewed her at Adelaide Writers' Week, and I do sessions there every year, and I loved that book. It was really terrific. I've been reading those. At the moment, though, I have a pile of non-fiction books by my computer because I'm writing next year's book, and they're lots of cookbooks. So I'm reading the cookbooks. I might not be cooking things from them yet, but that's where my focus is now. So I do dip in and out, and I read a lot of news. I have a background as a journalist, so I'm always keeping track of what's going on in the news. So I'm surrounded by words all the time, and I can't think of a more happy place. Write would be my tip, and read. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. Writing exercises the writing muscle, and reading is a way for you to enjoy a book and then to think about the structure of the book. Think about what you liked about it, how the dialogue worked, how the characters developed. Think about what you didn't like about it. And it's a way to analyse a book, to learn how the author did it. And sometimes it seems so seamless, but that's the skill of it, I think. So read and write a lot. I was really lucky that the first novel I'd ever written was picked up by my publisher, and I've never had a rejection with a manuscript, and that's a really privileged position, I think. But I had been a journalist and a communications writer, and I played with words all my life. So exercise the writing muscle, I think. And do writing courses and meet up with your local writing group or your state writers' centre, and learn things. I still do workshops myself. I'm nearly 10 years down the track, and I always pick up something of value, whether it's the way to approach a structural snafu, or a better way to write dialogue, or a better way to plot out a novel or keep track. As I mentioned, I write historical fiction, so I have to keep track of factual events against the narrative structure of the book. So plotting out, once I've written it, plotting out in a grid I find very helpful, because then I can keep track of dates. So read and write, in a nutshell. I'm writing a book about the 1956 Women's Weekly Great Australian Cookery Contest. That's why I have a stack of recipe books and other non-fiction books by the side of my bed, by the side of my desk. 1956 was a really pivotal year in the history of this country. Television was about to be introduced. The Olympics were on in Melbourne. There were big waves of migration from Europe, and Australia was changing in ways that for the better, I think. And some of the old ways were disappearing, were beginning to disappear for good. So I think it's a really pivotal moment. And this cookery contest prize pool was £6,000, which was enough to buy a house back then. So I just couldn't help but think, what if someone had won even £400, which was the first prize? What would that do to someone's life in 1956? So I'm loving writing that book. And as soon as I finish tour, I'm back to the desk. Thanks for having me. I did ask you that before.
Sorry, that's probably us not being very good.
No.